Hello everyone and welcome to episode 8 of Weighing In, the League of Legends esports talk show. I am your host Josh, and as always I have my constant co-host Ollie, ready and back to talk about the penultimate week of the LCS and LEC. How are you today?
I'm doing very good as always. When have I never said that? Not gonna lie. But you know, we've had another. It wasn't actually that great of a week of games, in my opinion. We had some good games that we'll get into, but overall, this week for me, it just kind of felt like teams that should be winning their games. I mean, we did have some upsets over in the LCS that we'll talk about, but it generally felt like teams that are at the top asserting their dominance even more. But that's not to say they weren't interesting games, just predictable, I would say.
I would agree, barring some of the games in the LCS this week, which were genuinely great games. I think the LEC was not dull, because that isn't the right way to frame it, but I definitely think that we've had more interesting penultimate weeks. However, I do think coming into a super week today will be really, really interesting, because only 2 or 3 teams in the LEC are locked in to playoffs, so it really is anyone's game.
Yeah, and I think, we've had some upsets, like you said, this week. Teams that you think would be winning and finally in this final 2 weeks kind of asserting their, or locking in their place for playoffs, not really managing to get the wins that they need to be able to do that, more so over in the LCS, like we said. But but they're all really exciting games, especially in the LCS. Also, I wouldn't call LEC dull. It was like we said, just more predictable kind of games, but still interesting to watch at the very least.
Definitely. So let's jump straight in and talk about the LCS. And I think we have to kind of start off with the team that we expected to come in and have a really strong showing this week. And that was Cloud9. And admittedly, they did have a really hard strength of schedule, playing both Team Liquid and TSM alongside FlyQuest, who were the easiest game that week. However, they only beat FlyQuest this weekend. What's your initial thoughts on the performance we saw this weekend from Cloud9?
So my thoughts, I mean, coming into the weekend, I was thinking, all right, Cloud9, they're really going to go for it this weekend, and I would say they would probably pick up a 3-0 week, just because of the way that before this, they had only lost 2 games this split.
Yeah.
And, they come in and get 2 losses, doubling the amount of losses that they've had.
I mean, in the first 4 weeks of the LCS, they lost twice, and in week 5, they lose twice. In 1 week, they've equalled the number of losses that they've had. That's mad.
Yeah, and I think, after looking at their game versus Liquid, it wasn't really a surprise after that they may have a bit of a downfall against TSM, just because of the way they performed in that game and, having their confidence knocked against a team who, we would expect to be doing better in Team Liquid, but isn't doing amazingly right now. So being beaten by someone that you theoretically should be beating is definitely going to have a knock on your confidence, and then going into a stronger opponent like TSM is definitely going to be a struggle on their mental. And I think the reason they lost to TSM is because of that initial loss against Team Liquid.
Well, let's talk about that TSM game, because that was one of the most insane games I've ever watched in my life. I have never seen a jungler get so fucked so early. In that game, Blabber on the Hecarim was level 3. Speaker for TSM was level 3 on the Hecarim, while Blabber was level 6 on the Lilia. That's a 3-level jungle distance. If you didn't catch this game, Speaker got invaded and then killed. He got 4 buffed on first rotation. He was so incredibly out of that game. And it literally was Sword Art being like, come here, Speaker, hold my hand, we're going to go and kill some people together. And that was one of the most incredible jungle support synergies I have seen in the LCS, or maybe even in any of the major regions, for quite a long time. It was just so it's impressive. That is a $6 million support game, because they wouldn't have won that one without Sword Art.
Yeah, I agree, and I think this kind of strategy is something we're seeing a lot more by these top level teams more recently, specifically talking about G2 when they played Fnatic last week. We saw them have a real big focus on shutting down self-made in the jungle. You know, they didn't really allow him to get any space, and you know, due to the recent changes in the jungle, you can't really just power farm anymore. So you have to be looking to try and shut down your opponent, and you can clearly tell which players and which junglers have caught onto this new kind of style and wave of jungling, and who is going to thrive in this new environment. And I think, like you said, Speaker did a really, really good job at shutting down Blabber alongside Sword Art, like you mentioned, and that is really important. Having that support jungle synergy, a support who can roam is a million times better than a support who just stays in the bot lane and farms with their ADC. And I think it's really, really, you know, it's super important to have that kind of dynamic. And also, you know, it's great to have the ability to play around any roles, because you know, if you get your jungler ahead, especially in this meta, this patch that we're in right now, jungle is probably the most important role, I would argue, just definitely, because of the influence that they can have on the game, and the fact that they can't just sit in jungle and power farm up to level 6 anymore and then go for ganks. They have to be looking to make that early game impact.
Yeah, 100%, and like genuinely a massive amount of credit does go to Speaker, because you know, if this was me in a solo queue game, even if it was my promos, like if I die 3 times in the first like 6 or 7 minutes, mate, I am at FF immediately. I'm about to run it down. I'm about to absolutely run it down. But the fact that he like genuinely was able to keep his cool and perform so well in that match, I mean, it gives a lot of kudos to a relatively new player in the LCS.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, you know, TSM adapted to the style really, really well. All of them, you can clearly tell that they had this kind of game plan before going into the game, which is really important, and I think that was detrimental to Cloud9's downfall in this game.
So what in your opinion is the biggest reason that Cloud9 is on the slide?
I feel like it's got to be some kind of mentality issue, I feel like, because you know, we all know they're extremely talented players, every single one on this lineup. It just feels like they kind of, in these games specifically, couldn't find the synergy that we're so used to seeing out of this team. You know, we're so used to seeing them play around the mid jungle duos, the top jungle duos, you know, the support jungle duos, all these duos that we talked about. They're always so clinical at doing this and controlling the map really, really well. It feels to me like they didn't really have a game plan coming into these games. It felt like they just said, okay guys, yeah, we'll do laning phase and then we'll take Dragon, get Baron, win the game. It wasn't really like they had a very clear path they wanted to take the game. And even when, you know, they had a slight lead in both of those games. I can't remember if it was both of those games, but I know they had a lead in one of those.
They were actually smashing the TSM game.
Yeah, and you know, they just couldn't seem to. They were getting these kills. They were finding like small advantages across the map, but they couldn't seem to convert it into any real objectives to help them, you know, shut down the game and end the game. Because this game, it wasn't a super, what's it called? It wasn't. It was quite a long game. It wasn't super long, but it was like a 35-minute game.
Yeah.
And you know, they had a really big lead, so they should have been able to at least, you know, get Baron and then siege the base. But they didn't really seem to have a plan or really any focus on doing that. And it felt like that was probably their biggest downfall, I feel like.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's partly what you're talking about, and then also, man, I'm a little bit worried for their read on the meta at the moment. Because we've seen some European teams, more European teams than North American teams, bring out the Caitlyn with a strong range support, which is what they did in both the games versus Team Liquid and TSM. And we know that someone like Perks, someone like Sven, probably has pretty good communication and ties still with the European scene, especially with Perks only coming over in the last couple of months. And so maybe they felt like, having talked to a different set of people than the other North American teams, that the Caitlyn was significantly stronger and it's having some success in Europe, but it didn't do what it's supposed to in North America. Like, it got a gold lead in the bot lane, but like you say, they weren't able to capitalise on that. And I would have much preferred to see Sven on something like a Tristana or a Kai'Sa, something that we've seen him have massive carry performances on, because when you get to that mid and late game, Kate can be good, but you need the team to play around it and ensure that you have good zone control to force people to walk through trap lines and things like that. And Cloud9 just weren't doing that. So I don't know if this was a last minute change in strategy, a misread, but something isn't going right there for me.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there's definitely, they don't have a huge grasp on the meta as such. I think, this doesn't really particularly worry me about Cloud9, because I think, they lost to Team Look Good. Obviously, they didn't really have a lot of time to go about changing. You can't change things overnight in a team, in a game plan. So it doesn't really worry me about. Go on.
Unless you are Perks, and the night before the spring LEC summer finals last year, he had a dream about playing Tristana, and that's why they played Tristana Lulu without practicing it once. That's the only scenario. If you have a dream about it, that's okay.
Yeah, but I mean more like the way that they play the game as a whole, rather than like their picks and bans. For example, it's like you can't really just change. You can't just go to the drawing board and completely scrap everything and completely change that in one night. So I'm not particularly worried for this team, as long as they do make those adjustments before next week or whenever playoffs is.
And they have a much easier strength of schedule this week. If you think about it, they were arguably playing up against the two other teams we would expect to be in the top three, along with Cloud9. And next week they play against two of the bottom teams, and Dignitas, which might be a challenge considering they are also tied for second at the moment. But my kind of final Cloud9 question is, are we going to see a similar slide and a similar fall from grace that we did last year, with Cloud9 winning non-stop, and then as soon as they lost, they could never bounce back? Or are Cloud9 going to bounce back?
I feel like they're going to have a bounce back. I feel like this team is, although only slightly different in personality changes from last year, obviously Niski being replaced by Perks, I feel like that can be such a huge change, because we know Perks is someone who can really influence the mentality of his teams. We've seen it on all the teams he's played for. Everyone talks of him as though he is like a god, and not just in game, like for people's mentality. So I'm really not worried about this team. I feel like they're going to bounce back next week. They're going to look like a new, better and improved team, and I have no worries. And I mean, unless they don't perform next week, in which case I'm going to start getting worried.
Yeah, I can't say that I have no worries, because I had no worries last year, and then they didn't make it to Worlds, even though we thought they were an absolute surefire lock. Yeah. But I do think that like you bring up, the fact that Perks is on this team rather than Niski, not that there's anything wrong with Niski last year, but Perks is a truly unique player in his mentality and the way he approaches the game, and the game with his teammates, and I think that can't be underestimated.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I feel like, I've completely forgotten my point. Sorry, I was going to say something. It was going to be really good, but I've completely
Perks
forgotten.
is great. Essentially, I'm sure it was. Perks is really good, man. Like, he is an absolute grinder. He's going to impact the way that his teammates like train and think and focus and come into those games mentally. And we've seen how well G2 in the past with Perks has been able to mentally reset and come back. Even just last summer, losing to Fnatic in the winners final, but then coming back from the losers bracket and winning in the final, absolutely demolishing them 3-0. You need a strong mental to do that, having just lost to the team a week before. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think, we'll see them bounce back, but if they don't, next week, I'm going to get really worried. Yeah. I'm going to start getting flashbacks.
Yeah, me too. And I feel like, the reason that I say I'm not super worried is because, like you said, we've seen Perks completely change how teams play. And, he has that mentality where, okay, we go next week. We'll change the strategy. We'll do something different. And, they didn't really have that with Niski, because, like you said, after they kind of started to lose some games, it felt to me like they just kept bashing their head against the brick wall, kept trying things that they knew that they had lost on before, and they didn't really accept the fact that they needed to make a change.
Yeah, I mean, arguably, Niski was a relatively one-dimensional player on this team, whereas even just this split we've seen from Perks, he has so many different styles that he can play, and different styles that seem to work well with the team, which is the most important thing. And so I don't think they're going to come up to the same problem that Cloud9 did last year, where it was, like you say, Niski wants to play this one style, Blabber can play both styles, but he's limited by Niski's pool. That means the team have to play in a certain way, which means it's easier to figure them out, and so on and so on, to the point where they just can't adapt, and they get into a hole, and before you know it, you've thrown all the advantage you built up in the first half of summer. I think that they'll be able to bounce back.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And other games this week. Should we talk about what I would argue is the second place team right now? I mean, I would argue that the two other best teams in this league looking really strong again this week, TSM and Dig.
And one of those teams, so we've just talked about Cloud9, we're going to talk about TSM and Dignitas, right? One of these teams is not like the other, and that's Dignitas, man. Let's just talk about Dignitas for a minute, because I don't think we gave them enough credit the last time that we spoke.
No.
I predicted this team, although I didn't do my predictions wide. I thought this team was going to be 7th. I didn't think they'd make it to spring playoffs. How has this team been so good?
Yeah, I honestly agree with you. I thought they were going to be massive underdogs in this, but I didn't really see them making playoffs, like you said. Honestly, I had very little faith in them, but I feel like, I can't really place exactly what it is that they're doing so well. And, you look at these players and you think there's no one super special on this team. Yeah. And, it's got to be something to do with their synergy together. I mean, we can imagine, the mid jungle, top jungle duos look amazing on this team. And, there's no real individual player that I can say has massively influenced this team. I guess Soligo for me would be the only one who I would say his performance looks outstanding every week.
Yeah. So, when you talk about synergy, I mean, this is the NA team. There's a reason that it's called Dignitas, because this is the only team with 5 NA players. And they are doing so incredible. How happy have you got to be on this team with all the input drama that's been going on? This team probably is worth half as much as Sword Art's 1 year salary. They're probably not being paid, the 5 players, more than $1.5 million combined, which is 6 months of Sword Art salary. And the fact that they are currently tied with a team like that, your morale's got to be through the roof, right?
Yeah.
In the team. And so, like you say, it's not any one player. I think the thing that I maybe struggle with and have undercredited this team in the past is my kind of historical bias from seeing both Fate God and Siligo being in the LCS, because of course they have played in the LCS before, but for very short stints on teams that weren't doing very well, having been subbed in a terrible situation, and you think, well, of course they're going to look bad then. You could put Sword Art in that situation, or Bjergsen, or Double Lift, or Perked, and they would probably all look pretty shit.
Yeah, I would also agree. I would agree on both those cases, and also I would add in Dardoch to that list. We've seen him play in the LCS. I mean, he's been playing for a long time now. Hasn't really stuck.
He's played on 8 teams now.
Exactly, and
8 teams.
He's never really been able to find his success, and it feels like finally he is managing to he's found himself where I feel like he belongs. He has the freedom to play whatever he likes, it feels like, and he has the freedom to pop off, be a solo carry, or carry or get carried by get carried, but play a more supportive role.
Yeah, I absolutely love what you just brought up, because I love the way this team drafts. They use that flexibility from Dardoch so incredibly well to say, Soligo, Fate God, don't worry, your champions are going to be locked in first 3 picks. Every time. Genuinely, go back and look at the pick bands. Every single game Dignitas plays, they priority pick and get strong solo lanes. And that is so amazing for your two newer players who have come in having poor histories in the LCS before. You give those guys strong comfort picks every single time, and they're going to do so much better than they might otherwise do in the team environments they were in before. And then Dardoch says, yeah, don't worry, I'll just play whatever, essentially, literally whatever he wants, because there's no way you can fully ban out Dardoch at this point. And it just seems to be working so well.
Yeah, I agree, and just the variety of realistically all of these players. Like, we know they have their main not main champs, but the champs that they like to play.
Yeah.
But they all have such a variety, a varied champion pool that you can't, like you said, ban out anyone on this team. It feels like, which is extremely important to have that kind of diversity in your champion pool. So that kind of unpredictability about what you're going to play is really important. And like you said, having those top and mid picks picked up straight away is super important as well, because it allows like you said, Dardoch to have a bit more freedom, which we didn't really see him have on other teams before. And I know he's talked about this so much that if he had the opportunity to play what he liked, he felt like he could be such a better player.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that happen now.
And I mean, the thing that you really have to remember when it comes to Dardoch is, end of last season, nobody wanted him. Nobody wanted him. And now he's tied with the team that said nobody wanted him. Dignitas, I think, have won a lot of fans. That's the thing that I'll say. Having such a group of newer players who are doing really well, who are all North American residents, who play a very interesting style, they're definitely winning a lot of fans.
Yeah, without a doubt, and I think they 100% deserve it just from the performance that they've put in. They've proven everyone wrong. Everyone, I'm sure, was in the same boat as us, thinking this team doesn't really look too special. I'm predicting mid to low end of the table.
Yeah,
and they've come in and absolutely proved everyone wrong in a very stylish fashion as well.
Yeah.
So
I mean, and they went 3-0 this week. Like this is a team who has genuinely shown some really good consistency. They've only had 1 week where they've had more losses than wins, and that was last week where they lost to, I think it was 100 Thieves and CLG, which was definitely a poor week for them. But every other week they have won more games than they've lost. So, you can't sleep on this team anymore. I think when they first started breaking into that top 3, top 4, definitely you could call them a pretender. But at the moment, I think they are a contender, especially if we see Cloud9 continue to struggle. That there's a world where we have a Dignitas Cloud9 semi-final and Dignitas can win that.
Yeah, I really wouldn't be surprised if they do. And like you said, they like when they broke into that top 4, everyone was thinking this team is just, it's going to be temporary. But now they're beating teams like TSM.
Yeah.
So you cannot doubt this team anymore. You can't say that they are faking it, or they're just on a win streak. They're going to drop soon. They're beating top teams, and that is really, really promising for this team.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget that Dignitas, I believe, have beaten TSM twice, so they have the winning record. So even if both TSM and Dignitas finish on the same record, those two teams, Dignitas will leapfrog TSM in that situation. Now, I do unfortunately need to put the brakes ever so slightly on the Dignitas hype train, because they do have a really tough week 6. They're playing up against Team Liquid and then Cloud9 and then FlyQuest to close it out. So we expect them to get at least that 1 win. However, this might sound insane, but if Dignitas beat Cloud9 and Cloud9 don't pick up a second win, like two wins, if Cloud9 go 1 and 2 and Dignitas go 2 and 1 and beat Cloud9, they'll go first.
It's not. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen.
But it's not impossible because right, you're pretty much sure that Dignitas beats FlyQuest, and I would give them either a Cloud9 or the Team Liquid game probably.
Okay, but
maybe. And we've seen like Cloud9 being less convincing. It's a possibility. And the fact that it is a possibility, I think, is the most insane thing.
Yeah, I think it would be very insane. I feel like Cloud9 would never lose to CLG in the current state CLG is in, considering they, obviously they beat Team Liquid last week, but we would say C9 is a level above Liquid and pretty much any other team except for Dignitas, But I just don't really see Cloud9 having that much of a downfall. I'm sorry, I can't see that happening, and to be honest, I see Cloud9 taking a 3-0 week next week.
Well, we will have to see, but there are so many really interesting games next week, and I think the Dignitas games are probably all worth watching because depending on how many they win and specifically which wins they get, not just their ending record, we could see this team literally finish first or finish fourth or fifth, and I think we just have to see how consistent they can be on their hardest week so far.
Yep, and I'm super excited to watch those games. Like you said, they could drop down depending on how the other teams do. Say if TSM have a really, really good week, they could take that second place spot, dropping Dig down to third. And if Dig don't perform as we would expect them to, dropping them down to third or even fourth. But I am going to go ahead and predict for next week, I think C9 finishes first, Dig finishes second, TSM third. That's my top three.
That's very interesting. If I had to predict who's going to finish first, it genuinely might be TSM. Because TSM's strength of schedule next week is ridiculously easy. Like, they play against Immortals and Golden Guardians. The hardest opponent they have next week is Evil Geniuses, which is not hard at all. And let me remind you that TSM have beaten Cloud9 both times they've played, if my memory serves me. Oh wait, no, did they lose in the first game?
Yeah.
Oh, they lost, okay. So go down to a tiebreaker, which you'd say, in the current form, TSM have a decent chance of winning.
Yeah, I just feel like...
And although Cloud9 have one more win, TSM's schedule is a little bit easier.
I just think, like we talked about, Cloud9 with this roster has the ability to change things. And like I said, I'm really not worried. I don't think anyone should be super, super worried by the performance of this week. I feel like lots of people are really overreacting to the fact that they lost 2 games. Like every team loses, and even top teams lose. Like it happens in every sport. Sometimes you have an off week, and you can't forget the fact that losing one game is going to put you down a little bit going into the next game. So you're not going to be as confident as you have been. But they have a week now to, well, not anymore, but well, for us it's soon. But they've had time to change things around to prepare, and I see Cloud9 taking a 3-0 week here and getting their 14 wins to come first.
Well, we'll have to see. I do think it could be literally incredibly close, and it genuinely might come down to the last day's worth of games to figure out exactly who's going to come first, because TSM are in a similar position to Dignitas as well. We could see this team very easily take first place if Cloud9 fall at the last hurdle. But if TSM have a bad week and lose to someone they shouldn't really lose to, they could very easily drop and let a Dignitas or a Team Liquid above them.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And TSM do have what I would argue is the easiest week out of those top 3 teams.
Their hardest team to play is Evil Geniuses, and we've seen them really underperform in the last couple of weeks. EG only beat 100 Thieves, which is the other team who's on a massive slide as well at the moment. But, EG lost to Immortals and Dignitas last week. And so you've got to pick TSM to go 3-0 as well. And that doesn't leave any room for Cloud9 to have a bad game.
No, not at all. And I think they're
Could you imagine if it had a 3-way tie for first place?
Is that possible?
Yes, because TSM goes 3-0, and they end on 14 wins.
They'll be on 13.
13 wins. Dignitas go 3-0 and end on 13. And Cloud9 go 2-1 and end on 13.
Yeah, I just
which would be a 3-way tiebreaker.
Yeah, I mean it's a possibility. I just see, I don't know. I just personally don't. I don't know. I've said my piece. I think Cloud9's going to win. So
it would be cool though. It would be absolutely, considering how much better the first team in North America has been than the other teams in the league over the past couple of years.
Yeah, definitely.
To have so much parity at the top of the table at the moment, with how incredible some of these teams were looking at the start of the year, I think is a really good thing for the scene.
Without a doubt, and we're seeing kind of a more separation happen over in Europe now, where G2 is kind of starting to assert their dominance, so falling back into that kind of the regular pattern that we've seen in the LCS and the LEC. In recent years, we have one team that kind of dominates. But the LCS is probably, I'd say, for once more exciting than the LEC at the moment.
Oh yeah, but, it's just with how close every team is at the moment and how stacked a lot of the top teams are. It's going to be a brilliant last week, and I think part of that is due to the format of having 3 games each week, because so much is decided over 3 games compared to 2.
Yeah, definitely. And I think they should 100% stick to this format for the next split and next season as well. And I would not be adverse to LEC adopting this style either. Because I think it definitely gives teams like more games, 2 just more practice in general, and for us more games to watch, more excitement. And as we can see, there has to be some reason that it's so close at the top. It's because they're playing so many games. Yeah. And I'm all for it.
So let's go and talk about the last team for the LCS, and that's Team Liquid. Now, yes, we have seen them perform slightly better over the past weeks, beating Cloud9, most notably in quite a convincing game, I must say. But then they did the most Team Liquid thing in the world, and they lost to CLG immediately after CLG were excluded from playoffs, from being able to qualify for playoffs. How does that happen?
I have absolutely no idea. They had what I would argue, they had their first 2 games. We would expect them to be a team like Golden Guardians, and we would say, all right, Cloud9 is probably going to slap them in this game just because of the way Cloud9 have looked. But they won that, so they've got to be in such great mental position. Their mentality has to be up higher than any other team after that game. And going and losing to CLG, it feels so rough for them, because if they'd have beat CLG, got a 3-0 week, they would have been in a really good spot as well. They
would be drawing with TSM and Dignitas, which could have led to the 4-way tie for first place.
Yeah,
that would actually be impossible.
It just feels so rough for them, and I don't know what went wrong in that game. I didn't watch the game, to be honest, but
they just didn't play well. That's the truth of it, and POB had such an incredible Lucian, and Finn was comfortable on the counter pick Cho'Gath, really, really punishing Alphari's blind gangplank pick.
Yeah, I assume you watched the game, so you probably know more than me, but
it just looked like a little bit of overconfidence, which makes sense having just beaten Cloud9, but with how close we keep saying this, with how close the league is at the moment, you can't afford to slip and lose to a team that you really shouldn't, especially a team that has already been relegated from playoffs.
Yeah, and especially right now as well. You can't be getting complacent and thinking we'll just pick whatever and we'll do whatever in this game and it's CLG, we're just going to win, because they're still a professional team with professional players who have proved themselves in the LCS, and they're going to capitalise on your mistakes. So, like you said, if they're getting complacent, it's not a good look for them and not a good sign for them going into the final week.
Yeah, I think the last thing we should talk about before we move on to the LEC is 100 Thieves. Now, they are obviously currently tied 4th place, 9-6, 1 win behind 2nd place, 2 wins behind first, tied with Team Liquid. However, this is a team that we might start to be worried about. They subbed in Rioma for week 5 as they were really struggling with Demonte, and they went 1-2, losing to both Evil Geniuses and TSM, beating Golden Guardians.
Mm.
How did this team look this weekend to you?
I think the change for me was very, very surprising, especially in such a late stage in this split. I think if they had just stuck with Demonte and, made it work rather than bringing in someone completely new, because, we all know the saying, it's easier to fix something that's broken than start something completely new, which I feel like this team did. Like, bringing in a new player completely changes the dynamic of your team, and especially I can imagine they've just been scrimming with the five main on their roster, because that's what they had expected to be playing with.
Especially when you consider the built-up synergy from those 4 players coming straight across from Golden Guardians.
Exactly, and it feels to me like a really, really terrible mistake. If they had just stuck with Demonte, they could have had maybe potentially a 2-1 week. Would have put them in a million times better position for next week, because now, they can't really, unless they have an amazing 3-0 week and everyone else loses games, they can't really make a top 3 spot anymore.
No, what they really want is a top 2 spot, because those are the 2 that get first round buys, I think. But at this point, I'm really worried. Of course, we probably still expect them to make playoffs. It will be pretty hard for them to fall out of the top 6 teams.
Yeah.
However, first and second don't get a first round bye. I don't know where I got that from. First gets to pick their opponent.
Yeah. The spots that you're probably kind of aiming for are really
top 4.
More specifically, like first, second, or third. You don't really want to be the 4th place team, in my opinion, because then you have to play the first place team.
Yeah, but you definitely want top 4, right? Because if you finish 5th or 6th, you start in the
win an extra game.
Yeah, you start in the losers bracket. Whereas everyone else will get 2 lives. But there is a chance that Team Liquid don't even make top 4. I'm sure they'd like 4th rather than 5th or 6th. But if they have another 1 and 2 week, which is not necessarily impossible for this team, especially because they are going to start Rioma again for week 6, it's just not looking good.
Yeah.
We kind of said our piece last week about the problems that we thought 100 Thieves were having, and the fact that instead of trying to, like you say, keep Demonte in, fix what was broken, go back to the style that was working before, they just said scrap it all, and now they're playing a really static and still style of league. It doesn't look good, and there's no way they're going to beat one of our top teams in a best of 5 at this point.
I agree with you, and I think if you look at this team now compared to the way that they were playing in the lock-in tournament, it looks like a completely different team and a worse team. I would describe their performance in the lock-in tournament as fresh, new, electrifying, that kind of thing. They look like come out the gates, brand new team, 100 Thieves, they're going to win it all. And now they just look like they're rinsing and repeating every game.
Yeah.
Like we would say about Cloud9 last year, bashing their heads against the wall.
They look like a worse version of classic Team Liquid with the win lane, do nothing, win game, except they're not as good as those players, unfortunately. So they have to do something more unique and more interesting to win. The only good thing that I can say for 100 Thieves is how transparent they are being with the way they're lining up the roster, with the number of interviews and videos that Papa Smithy, the general manager for the League of Legends team at 100 Thieves, is doing. It is genuinely impressive, because we don't get that from a lot of the LCS teams, but it would be great if some of the reasons that he was making these changes actually played out in the Rift, because they're not at the moment.
Yeah, no, and I think it screams to me that they're a little bit unorganised behind the scenes, maybe. Although, like you said, they're making these announcements, etc., informing their fans, it feels like there's maybe some internal arguments, issues happening. Maybe Demonte has spoken up, said that he doesn't really feel like playing right now, or something like that. I'm just making complete and utter assumptions. Don't take this as fact whatsoever. But there has to be some kind of internal issue though, right? Because you don't just sub out a player for no reason.
Yeah, I think, who knows what's happening in the 100 Thieves camp at the moment. But all I can say is I really hope that they are able to sort out some of those issues, because I loved the way they were playing in the lock-in tournament, and if they can go back to that, I'd be super happy.
Yeah, me too.
However, that's it for the LCS portion of this show. Now on to the LEC. This will definitely be a shorter portion of the show, as like we touched on at the start. We really are just gearing up for the final super week of the LEC. So we've really got two main points to talk on. The first being our top of the table clash that we had in week 7 with G2 taking on Rogue, and we saw G2 get a pretty convincing win. How would you rate the power level of these two teams?
I feel like G2 is honestly just proving the fact that they are the top team in the EU. Because, you know, we had the question before, if Rogue can come out and win this... I mean, we saw in the first game it was relatively close, long, drawn-out game.
Yeah.
But this game to me felt like a bit more of G2 asserting their dominance, and maybe that's because they knew that they could beat this team. They have done it before. They can win this game again. And, you know, it felt to me as though they had the game in their hands and they did what G2 do, and they controlled the map. They were able to gain these objectives from kills and play their game, and it really did look like they were playing their game rather than playing Rogue's game, which, you know, Rogue is a team which really likes to get the opponents to play their game, and it looks like their game plan just doesn't really work out against a team like G2, who is so dominant.
Yeah, it's very difficult, I think, for these two teams to match up, because Rogue are so good at slowing down the early game and leading into great team fights, where they have arguably the best team fighters in the LEC at the moment. And with a team like G2, you know, how do you stop? It's like almost the unstoppable force versus the immovable wall, with G2 being an unstoppable force in the early game. And we really saw that with just how well Caps and Jankos were playing together. Caps getting off to a pretty substantial early lead over Larson, and there's only so much of an early lead you can come back from, and Rogue are really good at coming back from early leads, but when it's, you know, 3k at 15 minutes, that's very difficult against one of the better teams in Europe.
Yeah, undoubtedly, and I think, you know, this again, it was classic G2 really in this game, dominating the game from the get-go and getting those early leads, like you mentioned, with Jankos and Caps being probably the biggest factor in this game for me. On the Lucian, he looked incredible, as you know he always does. But you know, he had a huge performance on the Lucian, able to shut down Larson completely. And obviously, we would say Larson is probably the biggest factor of Rogue's success in recent weeks as well. So the fact that Caps was able to mid-gap Larson so massively, not letting Larson really get anything going in his lane, and you know, able to translate that gold lead into elsewhere. And, you know, they kind of kept feeding Caps the kills. I think, can't remember exactly the score that he ended on, but 7-0-4. Yeah, so yeah, that had a huge performance in that game. They kept kind of funneling gold into him, and it worked out perfectly. And we've seen G2 do this time and time again, where they funnel gold, kills, money into one player, and it works out. And you can rely on someone like Caps to be that kind of person who takes the game in his hands and says, look guys, feed me the kills, I'm going to fucking destroy them.
Yeah, and I don't think this is the end for Rogue, obviously. No. I think the Rogue are an incredibly good team, and this style works against every team, and it even works sometimes against G2. I just think that Rogue beat everyone in the league apart from G2, and G2 beat everyone in the league at the moment. And so, with these two teams probably coming in first and second, they don't play each other till the finals. It's an interesting finals game. Maybe Rogue have got more fresh things, but, you know, there's no way that either of these two teams at this point lose in a best of 5 to anyone apart from each other, I think.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. We have a bit of a separation happening now, like where you have these top two teams who are performing better than anyone else in the league, and then you have those kind of the battle for third place and then the battle for sixth place, I would say, but I feel like G2 rather is starting to even make that separation between first and second place. They're asserting their dominance in Europe, and we've seen G2 be, like you said, that unstoppable force so many times before, and it feels like I wouldn't say they hadn't found their groove so far this season, but right now they're looking extremely comfortable in every single game that they play.
Yeah, I agree. The other team who seems to be really trying to separate themselves from the rest of the pack is Fnatic, having a really good game against XL and SK, a team that they were tied in with the start of the week. How would you gauge this, the quality and the power level of this team?
Did you say Fnatic, sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if you caught the game, but they looked really, really strong in this game. They had lead from pretty much the beginning of the game, and I think Fnatic looked like the better team, in my opinion, in this match, and it didn't really look like SK could really get a grasp. I mean, we know SK is a big team fighting team, and they kind of had a lot of win conditions that weren't really satisfied in this game, like the Rise in the mid lane was one of their massive win cons. If Fnatic had let this game drag out to say 30-35 minutes, then this game could have been a different story, but they didn't let that happen, and they shut this game down in quite I can't remember exactly how long this game was, but just they looked really, really, really strong. And one player who I want to mention, who has been so consistent for this team, probably the best player on Fnatic, I would say, the most consistent without a doubt, is Upset.
Yeah.
I think he has, it was hard for him to begin with, because filling the shoes of Reckless is never going to be an easy task, and also didn't have much synergy with Hilly to begin with. Now they're finding their groove. They look really, really strong. Upset looks like really, really an amazing ADC. I would say top 2, top 3 ADC in the LEC, and it's really great to see, because I mean, people had their doubts before he came to this team.
Yeah.
They were like, is this guy actually that good? I mean, we know he was meant to be the star player on his last team.
I mean, even I would agree with that mentality coming in. Like, I knew he was mechanically a good player, but like you say, to fill someone like Reckless's shoes is so hard, because he's so much more than just a mechanically good player for any team he's on.
Yes, there's always the Reckless factor. I mean, he's so intelligent in game. He has the game sense, and he has the ability to shot call as an ADC, which is something we don't often see from ADCs. That's usually like the supports or jungles role. He kind of brings that whole new element to the game. But I feel like Upset is doing his job in this team extremely well.
I agree. I don't know how much more you want to say about the teams in the LEC, but I think we should just give a quick shout out to the broadcast this week in the LEC. Once again, these guys are absolutely smashing it. I really, really enjoyed having Foxtrot and Excoundrel come in and cast 2 games on Friday, 2 games on Saturday. Brilliant they could get that to work remotely. These are guys who are mainstays in the UK league scene, with Foxtrot having casted before in the LEC itself. But to get those guys remote casting in, absolutely amazing. And it looks like they're going to be remote casting again this weekend. They haven't announced which games yet, but it will probably be the first couple, just because, to get the technical stuff set up before the broadcast starts is probably the easiest thing for them. While we also have one of the LCS analysts, Kobe, coming over to join the analyst desk today. Deficio joining it tomorrow, and LS returning on Saturday and Sunday. All in all, it's such a good broadcast.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I love the 2 new casters. I haven't heard them cast before. I know they used to cast the LEC a while ago, but I'm not sure I was watching too much around that time. But I really enjoyed them casting, and it seems like so did the rest of the community generally. Amazing feedback, and also having, like you said, Kobe coming back coming from the LCS, coming to the better region, obviously, to come and give his amazing views and thoughts on these games is going to be extremely insightful, and I'm excited for that. And also, Deficio back as well, really good stuff, and LS back. I mean, I have no complaints whatsoever.
It was absolutely amazing last weekend as well. With how much this broadcast is listening to what fans want is amazing. Just great, genuinely like a great job. It makes such an interesting and varied broadcast to have different people on every week. So I'll definitely be tuning in more than I would necessarily for the LCS. Yeah,
me too. And I think it's going to be a really good week for both LCS and the LEC. And, games start for us in about 2 hours now?
Yeah, just a couple of hours. So I think on that note, I'm going to go and have a quick power nap before the game starts, so I can stay up and watch all of the North American games as well, because they start at 11 o'clock for us. So that is all for this episode. Thank you all so much for listening. This podcast has a Patreon. It's highly appreciated, but highly optional if you have the means to donate to us. The link for that will be in the description of the episode as always, and we will find myself and Ollie's Twitch accounts down below as well. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Weighing In.